Hello everyone. So we were talking about chapter 10. In chapter 10, we are discussing hypothesis testing. In the last few tutorials, we talk about initially how to calculate different types of error, type 1, type 2, and then we talked about in last tutorial how to perform z-test and t-test. So we talked about z-test and t-test. If you haven't watched the video, go watch z-test and t-test tutorial before and then come back here. If you already know the background about p-value test, I'm going to discuss p-value test. You already know, skip this part of the video, go to the section where I'm going to solve p-value test. If you haven't if you really don't understand what p-value test is, then you can watch this part of the tutorial. And for instance, if you have already solved examples and questions from the book exercise, then you don't need to watch the video. You can basically solve some other questions, some a bit more challenging for the practice. So we were talking about hypothesis testing. What hypothesis is, we know that it's a claim which needs to be tested. For instance, let's suppose uh, I state that the average age, which is represented by mu of all GIK students, is 20. So this is my claim, and we don't know that this claim we call null hypothesis. Why it is called null? Because there is this equal sign in it, right? And in alternate hypothesis, also because this is the statement which is status quo, which means it is accepted. But let's suppose a new student come in GIK and says that no, the average age of GIK students is not 20, but it is not 20. It can be greater or less, but he says it's not 20. And this hypothesis we call alternate hypothesis, which challenges the null hypothesis, right? Now, in order to check whether the original claim is true or not, in order to test the null hypothesis, one can use z-test or t-test. So because we have two claims now, one is null and the other one we call alternate, but we are going to check always this null hypothesis and see whether this claim is either we are going to accept or reject this claim. So in order to decide whether we are going to accept that my statement that the average age of GIK students is 20, what we can do, we can, let's say, pick some uh, sample, and that sample, let's say we pick some students from the ES 111 class, and then we calculate mean and variance and see whether the original claim, my claim, is true or not. So this is performed either using Z or T test, and you can see the details. I'm just going to give a very short recap of no more than 2 minutes about Z and T test. So what they were was following. For example, because this statement we are saying it's not equal, so it's a two-tail test. We will have both left and right tails, and these two tails, what they represent is following. So if you remember the errors when we are calculating, this orange region corresponds to the region where null hypothesis is true. So in this orange region, we don't reject H0, and here in red region, what we do, we reject H0. And this region, for example, this lower tail, this corresponds to, let me make this tail again. So this tail corresponds to mu less than 20, and the upper tail, this corresponds to mu greater than 20, right? Right. And if you remember z-test, we calculated critical points which were plus z alpha by 2 minus z alpha by 2. And here in these two tails, what we did, we calculated z sample, z value. For instance, in this example, the sample of ES 111 students, we calculated this z from mean and population mean and variance. With sample size we can calculate this z. And in z test, if you remember, we calculated that if z is here inside this orange region, the conclusion was we do not reject null hypothesis. But suppose if our calculated z comes in this critical region here, let's say here or here or here, then we decided we will reject H0. So depending upon this z value, whether it falls in critical region, if it is falls in critical region, we reject H0. But let's say if it is falls in this region where null hypothesis is true, then we don't reject H0. So this was a z-test, right? And similarly we performed the t-test. Now why I am telling you this is because this is related with p-value test. So we are talking about p-value test, right? P-value test. So what I am going to claim is that p-value test is almost same as z and t-test. So there is very small difference between z-test and p-test. If you know z-test, you should be comfortable with t-test. So now one asks, what is, in order to perform p-value test we need to calculate p-value, but the question really boils down to what is p-value actually. P-value है क्या, right? So p-value is basically, in very simple words, you can think like this. P-value is simply probability. Now when I ask, okay, one asks what this probability tells us. So this is probability of accepting null hypothesis H0. So p-value tells you that what is the probability that you are going to accept H0. So if p-value is large, there is a good chance that you are going to accept H0. For example, in my case, in ES 111 class, if I calculate p-value and let's say it comes out to 0.2, so there is 0.2 chance. 2 out of 10 time I'm going to accept this accept the null hypothesis, right? So but in order to complete the picture of p-value test, in order to really understand, one thing you need to know more is type 1 error, alpha. So we need to know, just to revise alpha, we already know alpha, but I'm going to explain in a minute how p and alpha are related. But alpha is also probability, if you remember. It is probability, but probability of what? It is probability when H0 is true and we reject H0. So basically, if you remember, we wrote random variable here, right? Random variable. Go watch tutorials of types of error and you remember हमने random variable यहाँ पे लिखा था. So this is probability of, actually alpha is the probability to reject H0. जितना अल्फा बड़ा होगा उतना चांस होगा we are going to reject H0. So you can simply think of alpha in terms like this. So let me just move this here. So you can think alpha is basically it's also probability. Now probability of what? Probability of rejecting H0. Rejecting H0. In order to be complete, I should have written here given H0 is false. Given H0 is false. But I am not going to write that. In order to be precise, I will write this. So p-value is probability of accepting H0 and alpha is probability of rejecting H0. So these are two steps actually we do perform in p-value test. So in p-value test, what we do, we compare p-value with alpha. Compare p-value with alpha. For example, if p-value is large than alpha, what we can think of is, you can think accepting H0, probability of accepting H0 is greater than rejecting H0, right? So if p-value is large than alpha, what we do, we do not reject or accept. Do not reject H0. So this is p-test. This one equation. You don't need to memorize this again. Just remember this. P-value is probability of accepting. Alpha is probability of rejecting. Whichever is large, we will do that. P is large, we will accept. If alpha is large, we will reject. So this is the whole idea of p-value test. Now let's solve some questions regarding p-value. And if you already have solved this question, you don't need to solve this again. You can skip this part. So let's start solving some questions. So the question asks a random sample, so which means the first line is about sample. A random sample of 100 recorded deaths. Let me write data along with I read. So n is larger than 30, n is greater or equal to 30. It means I am going to use more z test. Z distribution. In this equation, if you read in this question, if you read all of this question, you will know that the question don't ask us to calculate p-value. They only ask basically test the hypothesis. So if the question is like this, you have a choice either to perform z-test or p-test. It's up to you. So similarly, if n is less than 30 and sigma is unknown, you can perform t-test or p-test. But if the question says perform z-test or perform p-test or perform t-test, then you do that. If it is not written, then you need to decide by yourself. So n is 100. What else I have given with? Because they are talking about sample. So the average lifespan, average of sample is given at 71.8. What else I have given with? So if you read the next line, actually it talk about population, and the standard deviation is sigma is 8.9, and finally alpha is given. Let me use red color. So let's say we have decided to perform p-value test, or in the question it asks perform the p-value test. So what are the steps? So it is, as I said, almost same what we do in z-test. So the first step, if you remember, we write null hypothesis. So in a null hypothesis, I will write average age 70. But one can say here it is written greater than 70. And if you remember that, we said it earlier that in alternate hypothesis, we have non-equality, which means it can be greater than, less than, or not equal to. In this case, we have greater than. So greater than 70 means this is um, alternate hypothesis. And the third step is the same. Before doing the third step, if you remember, बेहतर ये है कि we make a plot of z distribution or graph of z distribution, whatever you call. Alright, then we have two tails. Oh, sorry, this time I have only one tail because this is right tail. And this region is critical region, or ये critical point है z alpha. The alpha because we have one tail and this is 1 minus alpha, the probability in this region, or इसका जो area given है, this is 0.0. So with this information we can move on. We can write level of significance alpha 0.05. Now if you remember, in z-test we used to calculate z critical, this value z critical. But in p-value test, we don't need to calculate z critical. What we calculate is basically z sample. Sample से आप z की value निकालो. So z जो होता है z transformation, it is x bar minus mu divided by sigma and square root of n. So I have all of this. I have x bar 71.8, and then mu I have is 70, sigma 8.9, and square root of 100. The z value I get is 2.02. Alright. So why we need these z values 2.02? Now I am going to calculate p-value. So this is the most important step in p-value test. As I said, p-value is the probability to accept the null hypothesis. So what it means? So we are going to calculate probability of random variable z. This is the definition of p-value when it is greater than z sample. So what this really means? First of all, notice I have written greater here. Why I have written greater? Because it's a right tail test. दाईं तरफ है. अगर ये लेफ्ट टेल टेस्ट होता तो I will have written less than. ठीक है, तो जिधर को टेल होगी उधर को इस crocodile का फेस होगा, less than or greater than. So what this actually means, p value. So this p is probability of random variable z when basically this z sample occurs. So what it means? It means following. कि 2.02 ये z axis है, यहाँ पे. How I know this? यहाँ पे है because previous question से I know this z alpha है, this is something like 1.7 something, तो 2.02 यहाँ पे. तो p value basically ये एरिया है, ये एरिया जो मैं ब्लैक कर रहा हूँ, z greater than zs. So this gives you the probability or area, probability when random variable z, वो वाला area जो जी सैंपल की occurrence के बाद वाला एरिया, this is actually the interpretation of p value. तो ये 2.02 के बाद वाला एरिया. And if you calculate this, how can you calculate? You can calculate by z table, but first you need to convert into less than. And the p-value you get by doing so is you get 0.0217. Remember, this is probability of accepting recall H0, right? This is probability of accepting H0, and this is probability of rejecting H0. Now in step 6, all is done almost. We are almost there. What we do, we compare alpha with p-value. So basically rejecting H0 की probability, इसको हम compare करेंगे accepting H0 की probability के साथ, and then we decide. Now rejecting 0.05, the probability to reject is 0.05, and the probability to accept is 0.0217. It means that rejecting H0 probability is large. I have written in reverse. So rejecting वाला win किया, alpha is greater than p, so alpha is greater than p, which means what we do, we will reject. So the answer is reject H0. So this is the answer. Okay. So what we do in p-value test, the first 3 steps are the same. In first step we calculate z sample, it's also from z test, and the only different step is step 5. We calculate p-value and then just compare with alpha. जोन सी बड़ी होगी वो जीत जाएगी, rejecting की या accepting की. So you don't need to memorize actually this equation. You just see कि P or V, what you need to remember is P value gives you the probability of accepting H0. This is the only thing you need to remember. Alright, the next question is, we did right tail test question, now let's do left tail test question. So the first sentence is about sample. I will write N. So what I encourage you to do in the exam is following. Read the question or read full statement of the question first, try to understand and then write the data. But here I am writing it first because I already have read this question. You can also read it by pausing the video and try to understand it. Because of the shortage of time, I'm not doing that, but I encourage you to do it. So this sentence is about sample till this, यहाँ तक, right? So this is about sample. We are talking about sample. So this is the size of the sample, and here I have the average of the sample. So the average of the sample is 5.23, and then standard deviation of sample. Standard deviation of sample is written by S 0.24, but notice that N is greater than 30. So it means I can use Z distribution. So if I'm using Z distribution, I can write here sigma. S की जगह में sigma लिख लूँगा. Because in Z transformation I have x bar minus mu divided by sigma not S. That's why I have written sigma here. Now do the drill. First step, write H0. In this case it is simply given. mu is equal to 5.5. Step 2, write h1. h1 is mu is less than 5.5. Alright, what is the third step? Before going to third step, let's plot this z distribution. Alright, so this is left tail. I will have this left tail, और यहाँ पे मेरे पास critical point होगा minus z alpha, and this area under the orange curve is minus alpha, and remember this x-axis is z. And the alpha I have level of significance in question is 0.05. So this alpha is 0.05. Now, I remember this is just to remind you that this alpha is probability of rejecting H0. And the fourth step here we calculate Z sample. If it was T distribution, I would have used T, but because n is greater than 60, I have used Z. X bar minus mu divided by sigma divided by sample size. Okay, so just place the values. 5.23 minus 5.5 divided by what sigma I have is 0.24, and the sample size I have is 64 square root. So by putting all of this, I get the sample. The C sample I get is minus 9. And the fifth and the most important step in p-value test is calculate the p-values. Remember, p-value is probability of accepting null hypothesis. So this is probability of random variable z such that previously in right tail मैंने right लिखा था greater than, अब because ये left side पे है 0 के, तो यहाँ पे मैं less than लिखूंगा, ठीक है, less than zs, because इस दफा zs कहीं यहाँ पे है बहुत दूर -9, because ये माइनस, इसको निकालने की जरूरत नहीं, बट आई थिंक इट्स -1.96 समथिंग लाइक दैट, तो -9 बहुत पीछे है यहाँ. Okay, so what this probability is, I can calculate probability from the table z less than -9. Now मुझे z टेबल देखने, यानी ये एरिया देखना है, उसके कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग z की वैल्यू, सो -9 ढूंढना है, राइट. So but if you see, this is z table, the minimum value I have in z table is -3.4, but I need -9. There is no -3.5, -3.6 and so on. -9 तो है ही नहीं है. So what should I do? So see, -3.4 पे जो value है, this is 0.0003, बहुत small है. तो -3.7 पे कितनी होगी, ये इससे भी small होगी, 0.000 let's say 1 or even smaller. तो जैसे मैं स्मॉल नंबर होता जा रहा है, प्रोबेबिलिटी स्मॉल होती जा रही है, एंड यू कैन ऑल्सो सी इन द कर्व. जैसे 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 हम जाएंगे माइनस की तरफ, प्रोबेबिलिटी स्मॉल होती जाएगी। कितनी स्मॉल होगी? तो यू कैन गैस एक्चुअली कि -3.4 पे 0.03 है, बहुत स्मॉल वैल्यू है ना, राइट। तो -9 पे कितनी होगी? -9 पे जितनी भी हो, आई डोंट नो एग्जैक्ट, बट बहुत स्मॉल नंबर होगा, 0.001 में भी, तो बहुत छोटी वैल्यू होगी। तो दिस कैन बी अप्रोक्सीमेटली 0। तो यहाँ पे जो वैल्यू है, दिस इज अप्रोक्सीमेटली 0। सो द लेसन हियर इज -3.4 तक टेबल है, इससे नीचे जो वैल्यू होंगी हम बहुत छोटी लेंगे, और -9 तक है तो ये बहुत 0, -3.3 तक लेट्स से 0.03 है, तो -9 पे कितनी होगी? 0। तो p वैल्यू 0 है, एंड रिमेंबर p वैल्यू इज probability of accepting null hypothesis। तो जो p वैल्यू है which is accepting probability, ये 0 है, और जो अल्फा है which is rejecting, this is 0.05, और p वैल्यू जो है मेरे पास वो 0 है। तो कौन सी बड़ी वैल्यू है? डेफिनेटली रिजेक्टिंग, राइट। सो p value is smaller than alpha, which means accepting probability is small. The conclusion here is reject h0, because reject करने की probability ज़्यादा है. So this is the answer. Summary is all of the 4 points, first 4 points are same. So हम left tail ले रहे थे, तो जो probability है p value कैसे calculate करनी है वो less than आ जाएगी, बस this is the only thing you need to remember. अब हम टू टेल की बात कर लेते हैं, राइट टेल भी हो गया, लेफ्ट भी हो गया, टू टेल में हाउ टू कैलकुलेट p वैल्यू. So this is the question from two tail test we have already done in the previous tutorial. Maybe not, but it's a quite easy question. So first question is talking about population. If you read carefully, so population की हमें given है, what I have given with is population mean mu 8. Let me write it somewhere here. यहाँ पे mean strength population की 8 है, और then I have given with standard deviation population की वो 0.5 है. Now then the next part is they are talking about hypothesis. Let's write it after writing about sample. पहले sample वाली line ढूंढते हैं, कहाँ पे sample की discussion हो रही है. So this the line where they're talking about यहाँ पे, यहाँ से random sample. What is the size of the sample? 50. And the last is, this is the mean of the sample. Okay, so this is the data, and the final point is alpha. Alpha rejecting key probability 0.01. Now let's write these points. 1, write the null hypothesis h0, which says that mu is 8. Write the alternate hypothesis, which says that mu is not equal to 8. ये given है, यहाँ पे ये not equal है. And third, before moving to third, I always forget, we need to plot. It's not necessary but recommended. Okay, because it's not equal, I will perform two tail test. और z होगा या t होगा, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कौन सी यूज करेंगे, because n is greater than 30 we are going to use z. टू टेल्स है, अंदर जो होगा रीजन वो माइनस अल्फा होगा, और अल्फा जो है दिस रीजन इज अल्फा बाय 2 which means 0.005. So this is 0.005 this region, right? Okay, these are the critical points, and just to remind you, ये जो axis है वो z axis. So the third step is, after making the figure, we write level of significance alpha, which is 0.01. Fourth step is calculate the sample, which is nothing else than values we taken from sample x bar minus mu divided by sigma and square root of n. X bar is 7.8 minus mu is 8, and then sigma I get is 0.5 divided by n 50. So if you put everything here, the z sample value you get is minus 2.83. Now this is a bit different from right and left tail. So this is two tails. So in two tails what we do, p value कैसे calculate करनी है, and remember यहाँ पे दो critical points हैं जो हमने calculate नहीं किए, right? तो लेकिन एरर दोनों तरफ है, राइट और लेफ्ट की तरफ ना. हाइपोथेसिस जो हम रिजेक्ट कर सकते हैं वो यहाँ पे भी रिजेक्ट कर सकते हैं, म्यू लेस देन 8, और यहाँ पे भी कर सकते हैं. तो हाउ टू कैलकुलेट देन पी वैल्यू, और ये हमने कैलकुलेट नहीं किए, ये जी टेस्ट में करते हैं critical points. Okay, so how to now calculate p value, this is the question, and you should focus this. So how to calculate p value is following. So this is probability, once again, probability of random variable z. जब लेफ्ट टेल था तो हम लेस देन लिखते थे, राइट, लेस देन zs. ओके, और जब राइट टेल था तो हम ग्रेटर देन लिखते थे. तो टू टेल में ये दोनों हम मिला के लिखेंगे with the difference of this. Let me explain with small difference. तो लेफ्ट टेल में ये था, लेफ्ट टेल में this is from left and this is from right. तो टू टेल्स हैं तो दोनों को इकट्ठा करके मैंने लिख लिया, लेफ्ट और राइट. बट देयर इज अ स्मॉल डिफरेंस कि जब हम लेफ्ट टेल की बात करते हैं, ऑलराइट, सो दिस one thing we need to we need to be careful about, वो ये है कि z सैंपल की वैल्यू है ये -2.83, जो कि यहाँ पे कहीं पे हो गया ना माइनस, बिकॉज दिस इज 0. तो ये है, और इसके कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग जो पॉइंट है प्लस वाला वो यहाँ पे कहीं पे है. तो +2.83 यहाँ पे होगा. तो जो लेस देन मैं जब कैलकुलेट करूंगा प्रोबेबिलिटी, लेट मी एक्सप्लेन व्हाट आई मीन इज फॉलोइंग. तो मैं लेस देन में लिखूंगा -2.83 बिकॉज ये लेफ्ट टेल में आ रहा है यहाँ पे, ठीक है, और ये राइट टेल वाला था. तो इसमें मैं क्या लिखूंगा, प्रोबेबिलिटी z, शुड आई राइट ग्रेटर देन -2.83. तो -2.83 से ग्रेटर तो ये सारी प्रोबेबिलिटी हो जाएगी, सारी ये वाली सारी, बट मुझे तो यहाँ पे चाहिए ये वाली प्रोबेबिलिटी. तो आई विल राइट +2.83. सो समरी क्या है, just to be in order to be very simple, and let's try to understand in simple words. When you calculate the p-value in two-tailed test, what you do, ये लेफ्ट टेल टेस्ट की पी वैल्यू और राइट टेल को दोनों को इकट्ठा कर देंगे, राइट। बस यहाँ पे ख्याल ये रखना है कि जब भी आप लेफ्ट टेल की कर रहे होते हो तो ये जी सैंपल माइनस में, तो जो राइट वाला आएगा वो प्लस में हो। बस ये बात याद रखनी है कि अगर आप लेस देन ये माइनस वैल्यू आ रही है, तो जब आप राइट पे करोगे तो वो प्लस वाली, वो यहाँ पे हम कैलकुलेट कर रहे होंगे, ये वाला एरिया, लेस वाला ये वाला कर रहे हैं, ठीक है। बस ये बात याद रखनी है। और बिकॉज दीज टू एरियाज आर द सेम, ये जो ब्लैक एरियाज मैंने बनाए हैं ये वाले सेम है, तो मैं ये आप टेबल से देख के लिख सकते हो दोनों वैल्यूज, ये वाली और ये वाली दोनों देख के लिख लो। लेकिन इसको इस तरह भी किया जा सकता है, कैन आल्सो राइट 2 times probability of z less than, sorry, probability of z less than minus 2.83, मतलब बिकॉज ये प्रोबेबिलिटी और ये प्रोबेबिलिटी इक्वल है, तो जो हमें z टेबल देता है इट ओनली गिव्स मी द प्रोबेबिलिटी टू द लेफ्ट, तो फिर मैंने लेफ्ट वाला रख लिया और राइट वाले की इक्वल प्रोबेबिलिटी है तो मैंने 2 से मल्टीप्लाई कर दी। अगर इट 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 सीम्स डिफिकल्ट टू यू, नो प्रॉब्लम, आप ये कर सकते हो, इसका भी टेबल से देख के लिख लो, इसका भी लिख लो टेबल से देख के, ठीक है। नाउ फ्रॉम टेबल यू कैन राइट p value. The p value I calculated from table is 0.0046. Remember, this is probability of accepting. It's, and this is probability of rejecting. It's 0. Now in final step what you do, we compare alpha with p. We compare alpha and p. Let's compare alpha and p, and which one is greater? Alpha is greater. So rejecting probability is greater than accepting. What is the conclusion? We reject. It's 0. So in order to be more precise about this two-tailed test, let me give you one more example and then we are going to end this tutorial. So let's see what example we have. So this is a two-tailed test again, and pause the video, try to solve this by yourself, and I hope so आपको ये solve कर लेना चाहिए. But if you are not able to solve it, no problem. Let's solve this together. And first of all, see, in this question we have been asked to calculate p value. So बाज़ दफ़ा आपको क्वेश्चन में explicitly ये लिखा होगा. Okay, so मैं ये करता हूँ, I can write basically null hypothesis first because ये मुझे नज़र आ रहा है. Mu is equal to 800. और alternate hypothesis जब mention नहीं हो greater or less, then you know what to do. Let me write it more carefully. H0 is mu is equal to 800. But अब alternate hypothesis नहीं बताया हुआ ना, greater है या less than. So what we do is जब नहीं हो तो हम कहेंगे mu is different than 800, right? So not equal आगे. And the third step is write alpha. And okay, before we do third step, we plot. Let me plot more carefully. Okay, So let's plot this. So this is the curve I'm making. Although I don't know ये Z है या T है, but still. But I know this is two tail. So ये critical points है. यहाँ पे हम रिजेक्ट करते हैं नल को, ये भी रिजेक्ट करेंगे. माइनस जी अल्फा बाई 2. पी वैल्यू में ये कैलकुलेट करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, पर हम लिख लेते हैं नेवरदलेस. एंड दिस इज जी एक्सिस और ये 1 माइनस अल्फा है. रेड रीजन में हम रिजेक्ट करते हैं और यहाँ पे डोंट रिजेक्ट. बट इट्स नॉट इम्पोर्टेंट इन पी वैल्यू. ये पी वैल्यू में ये लिखने की भी ज़रूरत नहीं है. ऑलराइट. So red regions are critical regions. But the important thing is, अगर आप देखो क्वेश्चन में level of significance कहीं नहीं लिखा हो. There is no where you have you can found that level of significance is mentioned. कहीं पे भी नहीं है. So क्या करें फिर? So typically जो level of significance report किया जाता है वो होता है 0.05. अगर किसी क्वेश्चन में level of significance नहीं given, usually given है, हर जगह given होगा, but suppose in a question you are not given with level of significance, तो आपने खुद से assume करना है 0.05. so this is probability of rejecting it 0. मैं repeat कर देता हूँ. when you are not given with level of significance, what you do, आप जो standard assumption होती है level of significance की वो होती है 0.045, वो आपने ले लेना है. fourth step क्या है? जी सैंपल वो होता है x bar minus mu population mean divided by population standard deviation or divided by sample size. So what is x bar? x bar यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है 788 and what is mu? mu ये 800 लिखा हुआ है. mu is 800 and where I have been given with standard deviation ये लिखी हुई है 40. sigma जो है वो 40 है. and can I find the sample size? yeah, 30 volts. so n is greater or equal to 30, I can use Z. so let's if you put all of this together, the value I get is minus 1.64. remember it's a two-tail test. Two-tail test. Alright, now in step 5 the important step is you calculate p values और उसको आपने अल्फा से कंपेयर करना है. so this is important to understand. so right tail में right की करते हैं, left में left की. two tail में दोनों की होंगी. so दोनों की probability किसकी? random variable की. ये left वाले की है less than z sample. लेकिन two tail है ना, तो दूसरी probability क्या होगी? random variable की when it is greater than z sample. and remember that probability z less than z sample is minus 1.64. तो ये probability है minus 1.64. तो ये जो greater वाली है ये कौन सी probability होगी? ये इसके इक्वल जो पॉजिटिव पॉइंट है ना यहाँ पे 1.64, उसकी राइट साइड वाली प्रोबेबिलिटी है. ठीक, तो जो मैं ग्रेटर लिखूंगा आई विल राइट प्रोबेबिलिटी ऑफ सी. ये मिस्टेक नहीं करनी कि ग्रेटर देन लिख दो माइनस 1.64. तो ये ग्रेटर देन माइनस 1.64 ये वाली प्रोबेबिलिटी होगी जो मैं हाईलाइट कर रहा हूँ येलो के साथ. ये होगी अगर आप ये लिखोगे ग्रेटर देन माइनस 1.64. लेकिन हमने ऐसा नहीं करना. अगर यहाँ पे माइनस है तो ये प्लस लिखना है ताकि प्रोबेबिलिटी जो हम कैलकुलेट करें वो ये रिजेक्ट रीजन में हो, ठीक है, जहाँ पे हम एरर कमिट कर रहे हैं। तो ये मिस्टेक है समटाइम स्टूडेंट करते हैं कि यहाँ माइनस लिखा है तो यहाँ भी माइनस लिख लेना, नहीं, ये दूसरी होगी। नाउ फ्रॉम द फिगर आई कैन सी ये प्रोबेबिलिटी सेम है, ये ब्लैक वाली से। तो मैं ये क्या करता हूँ, ग्रेटर देन को 2 टाइम्स लेस देन को डबल कर लेता हूँ, बिकॉज ग्रेटर देन वाली सेम प्रोबेबिलिटी है। लेस देन क्यों किया, क्योंकि टेबल से मुझे ये मिल जाएगी। तो p वैल्यू जब मैं टेबल से कैलकुलेट करूं तो इट कम्स आउट टू बी 0.101। remember this is probability of accepting H0. Now the sixth step is you compare both. You compare p with alpha. p value देखना है कौन सी बड़ी है, p value comparison with alpha. p value क्या है, 0.101 और अल्फा की वैल्यू है 0.05. तो विच वन इज ग्रेटर, accepting or rejecting? Yes, accepting is greater. So this one is greater, so we will say we do not reject it. So this is the answer. Alright, so the last question I'm not going to solve. This one you will solve by yourself. You can see this is two till test. The only thing I can do is I can write, but you will solve this by yourself. Uh, Even let it be like this. Solve this question by yourself. The only hint I can give is यहाँ पे alpha नहीं given, right? So what alpha you will assume step 3 में, बाकी सारे सेम है। अल्फा में जो आप अज्यूम करोगे जब गिवन नहीं हो, मैंने अभी बताया, क्वेश्चन में अगर लेवल सिग्निफिकेंस नहीं गिवन तो ये 0.05. Alright, so this is it. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach me. I am always available. You can come visit my office or ask questions where you are confused. Try to solve exercise question examples. The final will be a bit challenging but not very challenging. If you are comfortable with the ideas और आपने practice की हुई है, midterms it will be slightly challenging but बहुत ज़्यादा मुश्किल नहीं होगा. Anyway, good luck with your exams.